All right, we're going to do Mansion Over the Hilltop.
I'm satisfied here, just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are pure as gold. Though often tempted, tormented and tested, and like the prophet, my pills a song, and with your crying there, no permanent dwelling, I know he'll give me a mansion my own. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are pure as gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a harp and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are pure as gold.
Sing that one more time. Sing it out.
I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are pure as gold.
Amen. Y'all sounded good this evening. All right, you may be seated.
Okay. Okay, all right. Good to see everybody tonight. I'm glad that you're here. Open your Bibles tonight, if you would, with me. If I could find our passage to Exodus chapter 6 and 7. We're going to begin in chapter 6. If we have time, and I think we will, we're going to look at chapter 7 as well. And then when we're finished with our Bible study, we'll go through our prayer list for the week, and then we'll be praying for those in our church and community. Chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. If you remember if you have not been here on Wednesday nights, the last few Wednesday nights, we are in the midst of the Exodus. We're in the book of Exodus, and Moses has gone into Egypt. He has approached the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh said, I won't let him go. Moses said, let him go. He said, no, I'm not going to let him go. And not only will I not let him go, I'm going to make things worse on the slaves. Remember, I'm going to make them come up with their own straw to make their quota of bricks. And so that made things tough for the Israelites, and the leaders of the Israelites who were responsible for their clans. They were all beaten as a result of the fact that they couldn't meet their quota. And so after several days of that, 2 or 3 days of that, the leaders go and complain to the Pharaoh. And after they leave, of course, they get no sympathy from Pharaoh. After they leave, there is Moses and Aaron standing there awaiting them. And so they unload on Moses and Aaron, tell them they're mad at them, it's all their fault. And then Moses goes before God and says, God, it's all your fault. And so that's the blame game. And so that brings us up. So I told you that was a lot of fun, that chapter, wasn't it? And so things morale is a little low at the beginning of chapter 6. And it's going to be a little bit before it gets better, honestly. But that's where we are, and sometimes in life, that's where you have to begin. So look in chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of the country. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and cruel bondage. Then the Lord said to Moses, go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of this country. But Moses said to the Lord, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And then he goes on the next verse to say these were the heads of their families, and he goes through the whole list of families. And so if you would skip down to 26, that's fun reading. You can read that later. Verse 26, it was this same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. They were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. It was the same Moses and Aaron. Now, when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why should Pharaoh listen to me? So that's chapter 6, and we'll get to chapter 7 in a minute. Just a few things I want to mention here. But before I do, as I like to do every week, is there anything that jumped out at you? Anything you noticed in that chapter? All right, the conversation that Moses has with God and vice versa is very redundant. It's very repetitive. God is amazingly patient as he keeps reassuring Moses over and over and over again. Yes. Anything else you noticed? Yes. Right. Right, that is rude. Yeah, Moses reported everything that God said. Moses didn't have anything else to say except for what God said, because Moses didn't want to be there either. And so he reports exactly what God said, and the people don't believe him. And I was going to talk about this in a minute, but we'll go ahead and address that right now. I find myself wondering why the people don't believe. They don't believe Moses at all. I don't think they really imagine what is about to happen. Obviously, if they could go back in time, from a year in the future and go back to this moment, they'd go, oh yeah, they'd be celebrating. Even though they're making bricks without straw, they'd still be celebrating because they know that their last days as slaves are among them. That they're not going to be making straw or bricks for much longer, that after generations and generations and generations of slavery and oppression, they're finally going to see miracles, finally going to be released. God's going to do everything he said he was going to do. So why are they having such a difficult time now? Well, I think there's about 3 reasons for that. Number one, you and I are the same way. They were part of a system all of their life. And they were so entrenched in that system, in that life of defeat, it was extremely difficult for them to comprehend not being in that anymore. Because they were slaves all of their life. Their parents were slaves, their grandparents were slaves, their great-grandparents were slaves, and suddenly they're just gonna get to go. And so that's the only life that they knew. They literally could not conceive of being a part of God's miracles to the point that they're going to be liberated, freed, and redeemed. They just couldn't let their minds go there. I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. When we go to Judgment Day, you and me, when we find out what God could have and would have done through us, for us, and with us, had we only trusted him more, I think we'll be as shocked as the Israelites. So we're not a whole lot different from them. We like small miracles with small commitments and small risk, and we get small return. But God wanted to do something much more significant. But not only did they not believe God, to be fair to them, it wasn't just a disbelief in God. They didn't believe Moses either. I don't know whatever it was about Moses, but they looked at Moses and went, nah, God wouldn't use you. And it may be that he's 80 years old. By the way, his right-hand man, his helper, is who? Aaron. Does anybody know how old Aaron is? He's 84 years old. So here's an 80-year-old, I think it's 84, we'll find out later tonight. Here's an 80-year-old and an 84-year-old, a couple of old dudes. No offense, old people. But there's a couple of old guys that are coming there. They probably do have long white beards, and they're all wrinkledy and weather worn, and they're walking a little slow. I doubt they're the vibrant military leaders that just had lots of enthusiasm. And they're just a couple of old shepherd guys. They don't. Or one's a slave and one's a shepherd. And so I think they took a look at Moses and thought, nah, he doesn't look like somebody God would pick. I pass, get us somebody who's 40 and full of energy and been to seminary, that kind of thing. Moses, no. So for whatever reason, they don't believe Moses. Now, to be fair to the Israelites, I doubt that Moses was presenting himself in the best light. I'm not sure Moses believes Moses. And if Moses doesn't believe Moses, the Israelites aren't going to believe him. In fact, nobody believes Moses. The Egyptians don't believe him. The Pharaoh doesn't believe him. The Israelites don't believe him. Maybe Aaron believes him, but that's about it. So it's a hard uphill battle. And so that's the second thing. The third thing is, if you're an Israelite and you only know one thing, and you're in Egypt, where do you go? These people have never been probably more than 50 miles from their home. And you go 50 miles in either way in Egypt, and what do you got? Just endless desert. You know, this idea of a promised land flowing with milk and honey, that's a universal way. Might as well say we're going to colonize Mars, because it was just beyond their scope of comprehending. And we're the same way. You know, I told you Sunday that little illustration about, is it the gazelle or whatever the animal was, what? Antelope, that they can jump really high, but you can trap them in with a 3-foot wall, because if they can't see where they're going to go, they won't do it. And we're the same way. The Israelites were the same way. If Moses had brought them a really good video, YouTube video of what the land of Israel would look like, and the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee, or, you know, some nice brochures or something, they didn't have anything. In fact, Moses, he'd never been there either. Even if he had a camera, he couldn't have showed them pictures. He'd never been there. So so, you know, you understand, they're thinking, I just can't, we're going to go from here out into the desert. It just didn't make a lot of sense to them. So anyway, having said that, let's take a look at the chapter very quickly, and then we'll move on to chapter 7 if we have time. I want you to note a number of things that God says in here, in this whole conversation is from God. God is talking throughout much of chapter 6, and so we should listen to that. Look in verse 2. Well, let me just start at the beginning again. Verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. I think God is trying to clarify to Moses that Moses doesn't have to muster up anything. Moses doesn't actually have to do anything. He's just the spokesman. He's just the ambassador. He's just the middleman. God's going to take care of it. By my mighty hand, he says repeatedly, verse 2, God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. Now, he's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things that he is going to present to Moses as reasons why he should trust him. Here's a little reminder to Moses, a little history lesson. He said in verse 3, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. Now, you know what he's saying to Moses? He says, I didn't give them my name, but I did to you. He said, and that's the very beginning. You remember, that's the burning bush. And God says, I want you to know, I started out with you from the very beginning. You didn't have to go with me for 40 more years before I finally revealed my name. I revealed my name right at the start. And I had not done that ever before in history. Not to Adam and Eve, not to Abraham, not to Isaac, not to Jacob, not to anyone. God had never revealed himself like that. And so he says, Moses, let's not forget that. There's a reason for that. That is significant in and of itself. I revealed myself to you. That's the first thing he says. I did not make myself known to them. Verse 4, he says he made a promise. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they lived as aliens. Now let me stop right there. He reminds Moses that there is a promise that he made. Now he's going to bring this up again in just a moment. There's a promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, and he's going to keep his promise. Whether Moses likes it or not, whether the Israelites like it or not, and certainly whether the Egyptians like it or not, or anybody else, God's going to do what he's going to do. And he says, I made a promise, I'm going to keep the promise. And so I remind you, I revealed myself to you, and I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. That's the second thing he did. And the third thing is he tells Moses that he has been listening. Now, I can get this from the point of a human being like the Israelites. They haven't been slaves for 5 years. Imagine if a country overtook the United States and enslaved all of us for 5 long years. They've been slaves for 400 years. Hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. It's all they've ever known. How many of those 400 years do you think they've been crying out to God? I'd say probably about 399.5 years after the first week. So they've been crying out to God for generation after generation after generation. And here God is saying, I want you to know, Moses, I've listened to them. I've heard them. I'm paying attention. It didn't fall on deaf ears. And so he says in verse 5, moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. So I revealed myself to you like no one else before. I made a promise to Abraham, and I'm going to keep it. And I have listened to the groaning and the cries of the Israelites, and I have remembered my covenant. The fourth thing he says is, I will free you. I will free you. Look in verse 6. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. Now, before we go to the next clause, that right there is what the Israelites need to hear unequivocally. This is going to result in your freedom. Whatever's happening now, you're going to be freed. I will free you. It doesn't say, I'm going to let you go into the desert for a few days, or I'm going to free half of you, or I'm going to free your grandkids, one day. He says, right here, right now, I'm going to free you. And then secondly, in this very sentence, he says, I will redeem you. And there's a bit of difference there. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. Now, what does redeem mean? Do what? To buy back or to purchase. All right, very good. What he means from this is you're slaves and you're not going to be slaves again. You were slaves, and it would be exactly like that if God went down with a big pile of cash and he just bought the whole nation. That would be a redemption. Of course, God doesn't need money. He's got supernatural power. And so he says with mighty acts, he's going to do that, with mighty acts of judgment, he says, with an outstretched arm. That means an arm of judgment. He says, I'm going to redeem you. Every injustice ever done to them is going to be brought to bear. Everyone who mistreated him is going to come to judgment to them. And so he says, I revealed myself to you like never before. I made a promise. I've listened. I will free you. I will redeem you. But he doesn't stop there. The most important and significant promise is about to come. Verse 7. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. And so that's the last thing I note here. God says, I will not only free you, redeem you, but he says, I will adopt you. I'm going to redeem you, but I want you to know this goes a lot more personal to me. He says, you're going to be my people. God is showing ownership, or he's showing adoption. You're my children, and I'm your God. That's a personal thing. And then lastly, he says, I will provide for you. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. And that's the last thing last part of the promise. I'm going to give you the promised land. I'm going to give it to you. You don't have to fight for it. You don't have to earn it. I'm going to give it to you. which if you remember going around Jericho and the walls just fell in, all they had to do was go in and claim victory. Now, verse 9. Moses reported this to the Israelites. And by the way, that's quite a conversation we've got, is it not? I mean, that's a lot of promises from God, and beautiful promises. You would think that there would be at least a debate or discussion among the Israelites once they heard this report from Moses. You know, at least some of them would go, okay, we can do it. All right, go God. No, no, they're not going to have that. Verse 9, Moses reported to the Israelites, but they didn't listen to him because of their discouragement and cruel bondage. So the Lord said to Moses, go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of the country. But Moses said to the Lord, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? Now, does anybody know what faltering lips mean? You know, I thought it was that too. I have a little footnote on mine. And let me read the footnote. Let me, back in chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 10. Chapter 4, verse 10. This is where Moses says to God at the burning bush, I am slow of speech and tongue. Do you remember that? So it sounds like he's got a speech impediment. And here, the accusation or the claim that Moses says he has faltering lips. And then at the end of the chapter, end of chapter 6, in verse 30, but Moses said, the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And so that's his argument with God. I can't talk. I can't talk good. And it sounds like Moses has a stutter, a lisp, a speech impediment. Maybe he just locks up, or there's something physically wrong with him. However, let's hold your place here. Look with me in Acts chapter 7, verse 22, all the way over in the New Testament. Acts chapter 7, verse 22. I'm going to say sarcastically, thank goodness we're not like Moses, but we're just like him. Acts chapter 7, verse 22. This is in Acts. Listen to what he says. This is Stephen's speech to the Sanhedrin. Moses was educated. Is that not true? He grew up as a prince. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in what? Speech and action. Well, it doesn't sound like speech impediment to me. Sounds like a whiny excuse. And he's milking that excuse for all it's worth. Maybe Moses is playing the victim. I would. That's what we do all the time. It's not me, Lord. I can't do it for this reason or that reason, blah, blah, blah. And so back to our passage for today. So when he says, since I speak with faltering lips, why should Pharaoh listen to me? Now, here's the other thing. Let's say Moses is right. Let's say he doesn't have a deep, resonant voice. Let's say he doesn't have the charisma of Billy Graham. Let's say he's just an old guy and he's got a soft tone. Let's say Moses is right. Let's say if God were to snap his finger and he gave Moses that Billy Graham voice, and he went in sounding just like Billy Graham before the Pharaoh, would the Pharaoh would have listened to him? Not one bit. It didn't make any difference. It's just talk anyway. Pharaoh's not going to listen to his talk. He's not going to listen to the miracles. Until the last one. And so he's just making excuses. But again, I give it to Moses. I give Moses credit. His whininess is relentless. I mean, time and time again, this is the third time he says, God, I'm not a good speaker. Now, the argument didn't work the first time. Instead of giving up, he just keeps going at God with the faltering lips excuse. God knew Moses, and God knows you and I. He knows what we're capable of, just as he did with Moses. And we are to do what he tells us to do, and anything else is a whiny excuse. All right. Any other thoughts about chapter 6?
It also could have been that maybe Moses was faltering in speech, but everything that came through him was from God, and that's what made it sound so wise.
Yeah, and we know Moses for what Moses would become. We have the next 40 years to think of Moses and we know his potential because it's all written down. Moses is not viewing his life from that perspective. He's viewing his life from the last 40 years as a shepherd in the middle of nowhere in Midian. I mean, there's nothing out there. There's nobody to speak to. He hadn't given a speech in 40 years. Maybe he did when he was in Egypt when he was young, but that's decades and decades and decades. What were you doing 40 years ago? And so, he's forgotten, I think, is his mindset. I haven't done this in 40 years, and so he's got to get out of the past 40 years and start focusing on the next 40 years, and that is a challenge, but you're right. All right, let's look in chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it." Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 80. I said 84. He was 83. I was off by 1 year. And Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. I had completely forgotten, by the way, that it mentioned the age of Aaron. I guess I watched too many movies. I always pictured him as a 40-year-old. But he's even older than Moses. I can just see both of them going, "What?" to each other. Anyway, bless their hearts. But it didn't make any difference to God. The Lord said, verse 8, to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a miracle,' then say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.'" Somebody asked last week after we watched the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, because Charlton Heston hands the staff over to Aaron, who is, by the way, younger, and Aaron takes it and throws it. Somebody mentioned that that is the command that God gave him. Somebody way back in the day in Hollywood had read the Bible. How about that? Anyway, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Verse 10, so Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw down his staff in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. So how many staffs did they have? It doesn't actually say. Am I wrong? It just says he summoned wise men and sorcerers and the magicians. Each one threw down his staff and it became a snake, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. It doesn't actually here say how many it is. And so either it says somewhere else in the Bible and I have not yet found it, and it may say that somewhere else, or we get that idea from the same place where we assume that there were 3 wise men that went to see Jesus and saw the star. That is, again, I saw the movie. It's 2, and that's an appropriate dinner for a big cobra, I guess. But it doesn't actually say. If somebody finds it, let me know. Verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the water. Wait on the bank of the Nile to meet him and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so they may worship me in the desert. But until now, you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in the wooden buckets and stone jars. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. He raised his staff